Hey everyone, in this video what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at another universalistic theory of ethics. This time it's going to be deontology. And so in this video I'm going to start talking about the earliest deontologist, Immanuel Kant, and talk about some of the introductory notions of his work. Then in future videos we'll flesh out deontology a little bit more. Alright, let's get into it. Alright, let's begin with deontology. Deontology is the meta-ethical theory that duty is the basis of morality. Some of the additional key claims of deontology are that moral principles are universal. That's why it's a universalistic theory of ethics. Reason is important in discerning and applying moral principles, which is a common feature in universalistic theories of ethics. Persons cannot be used as means only. I'll talk a little bit more about precisely what that entails in a little bit. And then also, intention, or a good will, is a means by which to measure moral goodness. The principal founder of deontology is Immanuel Kant, though he wouldn't have called his own view deontology. That's a word that gets invented later. And in his deontology, he really emphasizes the importance of what he calls the categorical imperative. So listen to the words of Immanuel Kant here in the Critique of Practical Reason. With one word, the moral law requires the observance of duty, not from proclivity, which one cannot and must not presuppose. What that means is that the right thing to do depends on what our duty is, whether or not we really want to do it. Now, for Kant, I think it's important to point out how he gets here. Before Kant wrote this book on ethics called Kritik der praktischen Vernunft, or Critique of Practical Reason, he wrote a book called Kritik der reinen Vernunft, or Critique of Pure Reason. And in that Critique of Pure Reason, he shows how there's things that we can know without knowing that we can know them. The technical term for knowing something in this way without knowing that we know it is a synthetic a priori. So in order to explain that, we need to talk about some words. A priori versus a posteriori. A priori means you know it beforehand. A posteriori means you know it after the fact. Prior, posterior. But then he also talks about the distinction between the analytic and the synthetic. Analytic propositions are those propositions where the predicate is contained in the subject. So I say something where I say X is, and then what follows is really almost a synonym for the first thing. For example, a triangle has three sides. As soon as you hear the word triangle, you know what it is and you know what it looks like. And so when I say it has three sides, I'm really reflecting back to the fact that it is a triangle. Saying a triangle has three sides is almost like saying a triangle is a triangle. Then there are also synthetic propositions. Synthetic propositions are not obviously true. Like if I say there's a red car in the parking lot, that's not something that you can know immediately. For synthetic propositions, they're not obviously true. If there's a red car in the parking lot, we kind of need to confirm that by going and looking at the parking lot. It's not something we can just figure out on our own. So Kant says there are these things that we know called synthetic a priori. That is, we know them prior to experience, but somehow they're not true by definition. There are things that we know before we have to go out and do any research, but they're synthetic, that is, they're not true by definition. How could we possibly do this? Now, in the Critique of Pure Reason, he spends a lot of time talking about how our mind works with various kinds of conceptualizations. And consider this as an example. Picture in your mind a cube. Sides here, sides here, sides here. Now listen to this question. How many edges does it have? And by edge, I mean where two planes are coming together. So yeah, it has 6 sides in 3 dimensions, but how many edges does it have? The answer is 12. Probably most of you had to add that up there and figure out, okay, how many edges does it have where that's coming together? But here's the thing that's interesting. That's an example of synthetic a priori, because even though you might have had to do the math there and count up, how many edges does it have? It rendered in your mind already with the 12 edges, without you having to program that into your mind. Make this thing. Picture this thing. In short, your mind made it with 12 edges without you even knowing that it had 12 edges. It just did that on automatic. And Kant's point is that our minds do a lot of things on automatic without us really having to tell it to do that. We don't have to program it. We don't have to shift gears. It just does it. Kant's first book spends a lot of time talking about how we do this by looking at shapes and all kinds of other things in space, and the way that our observations and the way our sensory apparatus works. But in the Critique of Practical Reason, he moves on to saying, just like there's stuff that we know without knowing exactly how we know it, but nevertheless it's true. In ethics, for him, morality works the same way. Something like murder is wrong is something that we know, our mind already reaches the conclusion, but we still kind of have to add it up to see exactly why it works. Our mind does it on automatic already, but we can still parse it out to see, yeah, okay, that works. And for Kant, that's how morality works. We just know it using our reason, just like stuff in math. How many sides does a triangle have? 3. Is murder right? No. Those are similar kinds of thinking for Immanuel Kant. And for him, this leads him eventually to the conclusion of what he calls the categorical imperative. Now, a categorical imperative is a term introduced by Immanuel Kant to describe moral injunctions that are unconditionally binding upon us. We must do them. This is different from a hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative is something that you must do if the situation comes up. The categorical imperative is something that we must do in all times, in all situations, and in all circumstances. And for Kant, it has 3 formulations. There are 3 versions of the categorical imperative. So let's take a look and see how Kant gets there. First, let's take a look at the very, very beginning of the Critique of Practical Reason. So at the beginning of the Critique of Practical Reason here, he says, practical principles are propositions that contain a general determination of the will having under it several practical rules. They are subjective or maxims when the condition is regarded by the subject as holding only for his will, but they are objective or practical laws when the condition is cognized as objective, that is, as holding for the will of every rational being. So Kant is here saying, to get to what a universalistic ethics is, here's what it have to be. It'd have to be principles that are not just true for me, then they would just be maxims, things that I choose to do. It'd have to be kind of like a law. That is, it applies to everyone. And to figure out what ethics is, that's what it would look like. Laws, not laws necessarily made by nature itself, nor necessarily made by human legislatures, but something that would have to hold in the will, not just the reason, but the will or the intentions of everybody. So what does that look like? And in order to answer that question, let's take a look at the beginning of another one of his works, The Groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals. So Kant starts the groundwork for the Metaphysics of Morals saying this: it's impossible to think of anything at all in the world, or indeed even beyond it, that could be considered good without limitation, except a good will. Guter Wille. Understanding, wit, judgment, and the like, whatever such talents of mine may be called, or courage, resolution, and perseverance in one's plans, as qualities of temperament, are undoubtedly good and desirable for many purposes, but they can also be extremely evil and harmful if the will, which is to make use of these gifts of nature, and whose distinctive constitution is therefore called character, is not good. So what Kant is saying here is this: there's lots of features of humans in the world that they've got. Maybe they've got good understanding, that is, they're a good thinker. They've got good wit. They're really good at being able to talk and say the right things in the right moment, cracking jokes and things like that. Good judgment. Yeah, sure, you can say all those things are good. There's lots of things that we could say about individual human beings that are good features. Like, they're good at this, they're good at that. But some of those things that we say are good could also be used for evil or bad things. So someone could be good at understanding. That is, they're intelligent, they're really smart, but they might use their intelligence or smarts for evil, or their wit, or their judgment, or some of these other things. Like, we think of like the virtues that Aristotle talked about, like courage. Courage can be good, but courage can also be used for evil. So Kant's saying, what's something that doesn't fit this mold? What's something that could be good that couldn't be used for evil? And he says it's the will. Now, the will is the part of us, our mind, that desires to do stuff, where our intentions are. It's not an actual physical place or something like that that you can point to in the body, but it's the part of us that desires to get things done, and therefore it's that place where we find our intentions. So good intentions are the only thing that we can say are really good, and the faculty of us that has those intentions. So wanting to do the right thing, that's the only thing that can be good. Like, you could use courage for bad reasons. You could use intelligence for bad reasons. You could use judgment or wit for bad reasons, or any other virtue. You can use them for bad reasons. And by bad reasons, I mean evil ends. But the goodwill is something that's good in itself, says Kant. So establishing the notion of the goodwill being the center of what has to do with goodness when it comes to ethics, Kant is then going to go on and ask the question, all right, starting from there, therefore, what does it mean to do the right thing? And that's what we're going to look at in the next video. In the next video, we're going to see how Kant fleshes that out with the notion of the categorical imperative.